everyone, I'm Anya. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about 6 reasons why I have never done NaNoWriMo. So I've written, I guess, 6 3/4-ish novels, and I've never once done National Novel Writing Month. That's the month in November where you write 50,000 words and it's a novel. And I used to think of this as a really big failure. You know, as a pretty prolific writer, shouldn't I be able to just sit down in November and write a novel, or at least, you know, a good chunk of one? But every time I think about doing NaNoWriMo, at least in its traditional form, 50,000 words in November, I just get this like sinking feeling inside of me, and I've come to realize that there are actually 6 reasons why this is the case. Now, these aren't reasons why NaNoWriMo is bad, but instead they're reasons why it might not be the best fit for you and why it's not the best fit for me, or at least it hasn't been in the past. And because this channel has so much focus on concrete examples from real life, I'm also going to try to give you as many examples as I can of what these reasons look like for me, or in a couple cases from my writer friends or from published authors who have talked about their process online. So hopefully you'll be able to look at those examples and see if these reasons might apply to you. Now, before I get started, I did want to note that I have done Camp NaNoWriMo. That happens every April and July, I think, and it's just a more flexible version of NaNoWriMo. And that has worked really, really well for me. And I'll talk a little bit about that at the end of this video. But until then, here are 6 reasons why good old-fashioned November NaNoWriMo might not be the best fit for you. So number 1 is you keep to a regular writing schedule. By this I mean you've made a habit of writing every day, or maybe you've made a habit of writing for 4 hours every Saturday, or writing every morning before work. Basically just that you don't have a problem with sitting down consistently to write. For me, when I was in college, what this looked like was basically for an hour every day before I started on my homework, I would just sit down and spend that hour to write. And of course there were always going to be times when I had to cram for an exam or finish a paper or a project or something like that, and I wouldn't get around to writing, but on average I would say I wrote about 6 days out of every week. And I did this consistently for several years in college. Now, the reason this might be a sign that NaNoWriMo isn't the best fit for you is because I think one of the big things that it's really good for is forcing you to get into a habit of writing, forcing you to sit down every single day, write about 1,700 words, and hopefully by the end of it you come out with a consistent writing habit. But the thing is, I think that if you already have a habit like this, no matter how many words or how much you're writing every day, if you're doing that consistently or every week or whatever schedule works for you, I think that trying to force yourself to fit into this external goal of 1,700 words every single day for a month can actually add more stress instead of helping you to improve your process. And for me, I knew that, you know, I wasn't necessarily writing 1,700 words every day. And in fact, most days I probably wasn't reaching that goal. And so I knew that adding on this external stress, this external expectation would just make the whole process more difficult for me, since I already had that habit of writing. So the second reason is you edit as you write. For some folks, I think Nano is a great opportunity to stop editing, stop censoring yourself as you write, and just sit down and get those words out. And for a lot of people, that's super important and a really difficult thing that they have to overcome. But for me, that hasn't really, like my editing process while writing hasn't really stopped me from still getting new words out and going forward. And so this feeling that I have to get new words down every single day actually felt like a limitation, because I do edit as I write. Now, what does that look like? Well, so I recently started a new book, and on the first day, you know, I sat down, started writing the first scene, wrote about 1,200-ish words, you know, okay, great. And the next couple of days after that, I kept making forward progress. But then after those few days had passed, I sat down and read back over everything that I'd written. And in that time, I'd been thinking really, really critically about how I wanted to portray this character, what kinds of things and themes and whatnot I wanted to be focusing on in the plot. And when I went back and reread those pages that I'd written, I realized that they weren't really supporting those decisions that I'd made in the meantime really well. And so instead of writing new words that day, I took the time to go back and align the things that I'd already written with those decisions that I'd made. And of course I could have just put that down on my to-do list for editing and come back to it later. And I definitely sometimes do that because I think it is so important to maintain your momentum while writing and just continuing to put out new words. But in this case, I felt that I would be lacking a sort of peace of mind if I hadn't gone back and changed that, because these were really fundamental, foundational things about the book that I wanted to set up from the very first pages and get those super strongly in place before I continued on. And I think if I'd been doing NaNoWriMo, I wouldn't have had that flexibility to take time off in order to edit the things that I'd already written. Overall, I just don't want to be feeling like I can't go back to change things because it's wasting this limited time that I have to write when I have to be getting 1,700 words a day to do Nano. So the third reason I think NaNoWriMo might not be a good fit for me is because I experience writing fatigue. And obviously everybody feels tired of writing at some point, and that's completely normal, and I think something that every writer goes through. But what I mean by writing fatigue in this case is a sort of like backlash or almost hangover that you get when you write too much in one sitting, and then the next day you find yourself unable to write. I was seeing on social an author, I want to say it was Victoria Schwab, but they were talking about how they don't let themselves write more than a few hours in a day, because if they do that, then they get burned out. And I think I experienced a similar thing. Like one time I wrote, well, not quite 50,000 words in a month, but 40,000 words about, and after that month, I just felt like I couldn't write for weeks afterwards. And even though my momentum had been really, really good during that time, afterwards, it completely wrecked my momentum. And I just don't really think it was worth it to really push myself to get those words in during the month, when if I'd maybe taken it a little slower, I would have kept my motivation and been actually more excited about the project and felt better about it when I finished it than after I pushed myself to get those words in. So the fourth reason is you find it hard to write 1,700 words or more in one sitting. So this doesn't mean that you don't have the time to write 1,700 words in one sitting or in one day. I think NaNoWriMo is actually such a great tool for pushing you to make that time and to maybe watch, an hour less of Netflix or scroll for an hour less so that you can put that time in to write. But what I mean here is, say you have a day where you can write however much you want, like there's nothing else you have to do, you have unlimited time. I've found, at least for me, that there's sort of a cap beyond which the whole process of writing just becomes really a struggle. Like it's not very much fun anymore. And for me, that's about 1,500 words nowadays. I have one friend for whom it's about 900 words. But, basically the idea is that if you wouldn't write 1,700 words, even on a day where you had unlimited time, at least for me, I don't know if it would be so helpful to push myself to get those extra words when the process is so unpleasant at times. Now, that being said, I think this cap, this limit, can definitely increase. For me, it used to be about 1,000 words, and over, I'd say about 4 years of consistent practice, it's increased to 1,500 words. So that's a pretty significant increase. And I think NaNoWriMo can be a really, really great tool for helping if your goal is to push yourself on that cap of how much can you write a day. But anyway, for me, especially a little longer ago when I was capping out about 1,000 words, I just knew that NaNoWriMo would not be the best fit for me because it's a little unrealistic to expect myself to jump from 1,000 words to 1,700 words every day when I'd already been practicing consistently. I think that's the key here, is that I'd already been sort of pushing myself and practicing, and expecting myself to make that jump suddenly just felt a little unrealistic and like it would end in more stress and less enjoyment of the writing process. So reason number 5, you find joy in focusing on language at the sentence level. So everybody hopefully thinks about language, the craft of the words, at the sentence-to-sentence, word-by-word, phrase-by-phrase level at some point during the editing process. And some people like to think about that more at the end, but for me, I like to think about it as I'm getting the words out on the paper, even in the very first draft. And honestly, that's really the reason that I find so much joy and why I love writing so much. Plot and characters and all of that, it's interesting, but the thing that I really, really love about writing is just the act of putting the words together on that granular level. And not only that, but I love reading over my work the next day and thinking, ooh, you know, that's a really nice sentence. It doesn't happen often, but sometimes I'll be reading back and I'll think to myself, that's a good sentence, that's a sentence that I would appreciate even if it were in some sort of a published book or something like that. And that's just such a great feeling. And I really think that NaNoWriMo isn't the best way to focus in on that. You know, unless you have a lot of time to write, or I mean, maybe you're just a lot better at putting words together than I am. But it can be tricky to reach that 1,700 words while you're still taking the time that every sentence requires. You know, maybe that's 30 seconds, maybe that's 2 minutes, maybe that's 5 minutes. You're sitting there thinking about one sentence. And if you're thinking about this quota of 1,700 words a day, I think that can become really, really difficult. And if, like me, you're someone who the main reason you love writing is because of that, I think NaNoWriMo can just take a lot of the enjoyment out of writing for you. This keeps coming up again and again, but I don't think it's worth the stress and worth giving up what you love about writing just to get in more words. Now, the sixth reason is you write very well-developed first drafts. Now, this is, of course, really related to number 5, but basically there are some folks who subscribe to the quote-unquote zero draft method. Basically, a really detailed outline, essentially, that becomes their first draft. You're getting down your ideas in a really, really rough form, and the idea is that you then go back and almost completely rewrite or edit really heavily to make that into a final piece of work. And this zero draft is the first thing that they're writing. And I think NaNoWriMo could be a really great time to get that down and get all your ideas out so that then you can go back and finesse them later. And then, of course, there are other people whose first drafts are really, really polished and they don't edit nearly as much. And I think if you fall more on that end of the spectrum, the polished first drafts, NaNoWriMo might not be the best fit. And the reason for that is that, you know, polishing the first time around and making sure that everything's consistent, there's no plot holes, your character arcs are really strong and where you want them to be, all of that, it takes time. It takes, you know, going back and editing and thinking about things and rewriting things, and basically you won't be able to write so quickly because you're putting all of this work into one draft rather than spreading it out over multiple drafts. Now, a good question to ask yourself to determine which sort of writer you are here, I think, is asking yourself whether you enjoy writing more or editing more. And, you know, I have one friend in particular who I'm thinking of who really, really loves editing, really despises the process of drafting, and I'm the complete opposite. You know, I love getting down that first draft, and then afterwards editing can be a bit of a drag. And so I really want to do as little editing as possible, and that means putting in a lot of thought and a lot of work into the very first draft, the first words that I get down on the paper. You know I'll inevitably miss things like plot holes and stuff like that if I'm moving too quickly, and I think with Nano that's just going to be the case. So that's one more reason why NaNoWriMo has not been the best fit for me. So the last thing I want to talk about here is how you can use NaNoWriMo even if some of these things apply to you. Because this video, I'm really not trying to say that Nano is completely useless. It does have some really valuable aspects that even I have taken advantage of a lot. And so I just wanted to share some of those. So the first one I mentioned earlier is Camp NaNoWriMo. That's every April and July, and basically the idea is that it's a more flexible version of NaNoWriMo. You set your own goal rather than having the goal automatically set to 50,000 words in a month. And if I'm not mistaken, I think you can set goals in terms of time as well as in terms of word count. And so that can be really helpful if that's the way you prefer to track your writing. And you still get all the badges and the graphs showing your progress and all that cool stuff. And you still get the winter goodies like Scrivener discounts. Now, I think NaNoWriMo itself also offers a lot of other really cool resources. One is all the Nano Prep resources, which is basically free resources about how to go about writing a novel. How do you start that process? How do you even think about it? Another one is the author pep talks and different interviews and whatnot that they do with published authors. You know, sometimes I'll be in the middle of writing something and not really feeling it, you know, and it can be really good to read some of those pep talks and feel like, you know, my favorite authors are coming in to encourage me. And then the last thing I really wanted to highlight is the community aspect of it. You know, there are forums and write-ins. At this point, they're all virtual, I think. But I think it can be a really great way to get your questions answered, to connect with other writers, even if you're not doing the full 50,000 words. I really love that these things make you feel like you're not alone, because writing can be such a lonely endeavor sometimes. So to wrap it up, you know, I think NaNoWriMo can be super valuable, as I was just talking about, and I do have a lot of friends who have written many of their books during NaNoWriMo, who have started their book in NaNoWriMo, some friends who even only write in November. But I also had to accept that that isn't really the right thing for me. And I hope this video has helped you to do the same, to come to terms with that, or at least to think critically about your decision of whether or not to do NaNoWriMo, even if there is, I think, a lot of pressure to do it in the writing community. So I'd love to chat about this in the comments. What are some ways that you found NaNoWriMo to be helpful? What are some reasons you've decided not to do it? What are your strategies for success? What are, ways that you've used it outside of that traditional 50,000 word structure? Let me know in the comments, and while you're here, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope this video was helpful, was enlightening, and I will see you next time. Bye.